words for me to get to present to you. What happened? Not me.
Sorry.
You'd have any experience at this, wouldn't you?
I don't know why that fell off.
How many of these? Oh, he told me this afternoon. It said about 60 or 70 of these talks to people like us. So he shouldn't drop his microphone.
I'm very sorry. Please forgive me.
It's hard for me to even imagine Simon Estes at Oakland. And I'm sure it is for some of you. Somebody asked me in the pool, "You mean he's going to really be here? It's not just him on a screen?" And here he is in the flesh. You don't want to hear me talk, but I should introduce myself because some of you probably don't know that I'm Ann Howard Jones. Simon and I have been friends for a long time because we were undergraduates here at the same time. He started a little before me and I'm a little slow. So Simon was born in Centerville, Iowa. And there are some other distinguished members of this company from Centerville, Iowa, like Jimmy Henderson. And some of you knew Honey Boxman, who was also from Centerville, has a building named after him. He is maybe Iowa's most famous guy. If you don't count athletes, and if you don't count politicians, but if you count the people that really count, he's the guy. He's a graduate of the university. 1986, I think, was his diploma. But he's won all those awards that the university gives. Distinguished alumni, the Iowan Award, which Iowa gives only once in a while. And I think in the 40 years of its existence, they've only given it 30 times, and Simon is the winner of one of those.
Number 13.
Oh, you know that he has an international career in opera particularly. He's recently retired after making his debut in 1965, if you can imagine, in Germany, of all places, not speaking a word of it, nor knowing anything at all about it. He says he was naive, but I don't know. I think there has to be a word for somebody that's got every skill, every talent imaginable, just hasn't been everywhere. Is it hard to hear? I have to talk at it. If I can't move my head, is that the deal?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. I'll try better. His last performance was in Iowa, in Porgy and Bess in the summertime. He didn't sing Porgy, which he has sung 147 times, but he sang one of the minor roles, right? And I unfortunately didn't get to hear it. I'm very sorry about that. He'll tell you, but his most recent honor, gee, I'm sorry, this is cracking. His most recent honor was induction into the Metropolitan Opera. Oh, this looks better. This looks like a bigger deal.
Look in your bucket.
The International Hall of Fame of the Metropolitan Opera. They just began the thing.
Yes, it's the first year. It's called the Opera Hall of Fame. And there's never been one anywhere in the world. And it should have been done 2 years ago, but because of the COVID, they had to postpone it. But there were 10 inductees. And I was blessed to be one of the first 10 in the entire world in the Opera Hall of Fame.
There's hardly a name in the annals of the world of politics, the world of leadership, that hasn't been somehow associated with Simon. If you read his bio, not the Wikipedia bio, but the real bio, I mean, everybody from Nelson Mandela, Desmond Tutu, Yasser Arafat, I don't know what he was doing there, but we'll find out.
Rabin was also there.
Who?
Rabin.
Nixon, Carter, Wiesel, Elie Wiesel, most of you know, Bill Clinton, Bush Sr., LBJ, Kennedy, did the Kennedy Center inaugural concert, 25th and 50th anniversary of the UN.
And 75th this year.
Oh!
I sang for the 25th. That was in San Francisco, where the United Nations originated. And then I sang the 50th in New York City with the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. We did Beethoven the Ninth Symphony. And I remember when I was at 50th, I said, well, I'll never be around to do the 75th. When I was still around, and we had to do it, that's right, last year, but we had to do it virtual.
Oh, yeah.
But they asked me to please do it so that I could say I'm the only person that sang in the 25th, 50th, and 75th. I won't make you remember that.
Don't be too sure. So I think there are so many things we want to know about Simon, and unfortunately we're not going to get to hear him sing in person because he's retired, and I promised I wouldn't ask him to sing live. But I think there are a lot of interesting things about Simon's growing up and his honing of his craft that are interesting. And one of the things is he came out of Centerville Public Schools. And these days, could we say that our public schools were doing this for our young people, giving them the opportunity to learn to sing beautifully, to read music, to know about musical skills? I'm not so sure. But I wonder what Simon thinks about that. Your early musical training was in your high school and your junior high chorus.
Well,
Boy soprano, if you can imagine.
Yeah. I was in junior high school, and Don Gunderson was the choral director of the high school choir, and to this day I don't know how that came about, but he asked me to come over and sing in the high school choir, so he had to ask the superintendent of the junior high school. His name was Mr. Howard, and he said, well, yes, and so I went over and sang in the high school choir, and I didn't know that I had any spatial voice. Really, I didn't, having come from Centerville. I didn't know anything about classical music, but I remember I sang a solo, Sweet Little Jesus Boy, and a lady named Mrs. Poffenberger was sitting in the choir room at the high school in Centerville, and she was crying, and after I finished singing, I said, oh, Mrs. Poffenberger, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to make you cry. And she said, no, Simon, they weren't sad tears, they were happy tears. And I've never forgotten, that was in the 9th grade. But I did sing first soprano in the high school choir.
So then I want to know, how old was he when the bottom fell out of his voice? Because you know how that goes with some of those boy sopranos. They wake up one day and they're talking like this, and the next thing you know. When was that?
Well, it was my senior year of high school. I played football, basketball, and track, and all that sort of thing. And during the summer, I didn't do any singing. I had a job working, etc. So I went to choir, and I went to sing, and I had basically no voice. And Don Gunderson was a choral director, so he sent me to a doctor in Centerville. We didn't have any E&T doctors in Centerville. So I go to the doctor. It was Dr. Brummett. You probably remember his name. And he put the little wooden stick and pushed down my tongue. He never even saw my vocal cords. And he just looked at my throat, and he said, I don't see anything wrong. I have a feeling your voice is changing. And that's what happened. I went from first soprano to bass. My senior year in high school.
17, 18 years old.
Right.
Goodness. Where's Kate Geffeller? It'd be interesting for her to have a look at that throat, see what's going on in there. I think that the guy can't get out of the classroom. He's currently a professor at Iowa State and at DMAC, and he was for a long time at Wartburg, and he and I knew one another well because he was 5 years at Boston University where I was.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I want to make sure she gets her credit. My wife and I were driving from Tulsa, Oklahoma, back to Iowa, and Ann called me and said, Simon, we'd love it if you'd come to teach at Boston University. She invited me.
Like I had the authority to do that.
But it worked out.
It did.
So that's where we met after all those years in Centerville. I was a professor there for many years, yes.
We had a great time, and we got to do a couple of concerts together. One was, we inaugurated a new president at BU, and the concert was, we did a concert in Boston, of course, but there's so many alumni in New York, so we took the whole operation to New York City and did a concert in New York City, same cast, same crew, and it was Vaughan Williams' Don't I Know He's Boccia, remember? We sang that together, I conducted, he sang, and then in Boston, the thrill of a lifetime for me. He came up to me in the hall. You know, before I'm through, I'd like to sing a Verdi Requiem with you conducting. And he's recorded with Muti, he's recorded it with Levine, he's recorded it with you name it, all the biggies. And I thought, I guess I better go home and practice. You know? Well, the thrill. Oh,
she was fantastic. We have a CD of it. No, really. I don't mean to interrupt, but I just have to fill in the places here. Because, no, really, very few female conductors were allowed to conduct, and that's another hurdle that had to be jumped over. But I had never sung under her baton until we did the Verdi Requiem, and she was absolutely fantastic, and I was very, very, very proud of you. And even though I've sung it with all of the great conductors, but you were just as good as any of those guys.
Listen to that. It's hard to think. I mean, we've had a lot of fun and a lot of good times together, but is there anything better than collaborating in a performance like that? I mean, I just looked over at him and out came these mellifluous tones, and that more stupid that ends on the low E. He's standing right beside me and the floorboards are shaking. Afterwards, the president, who some of you know, John Silver, he was a little bit uncouth sometimes, and he came up to me afterwards and he said, you know what? That guy can sing. Oh boy. So I think that we're interested in a lot of things, but with over 100 roles to his credit, he has a prodigious capacity for memory. And I want to know how you do that.
Well, I must honestly say, God gave me a talent to sing, and I didn't know that he had given me a talent to memorize until I started my career at West Berlin at the Deutsche Oper in 1965. I went to Juilliard, and my third year at Juilliard, I met a girlfriend at Juilliard, and she had graduated in 64 and went to Germany to find an agent to try to help her get a job at some of the opera houses, and I wanted to see her at Christmas time. But I didn't have any money, of course, and I knew I couldn't go to somebody and say, could you loan me some money to go visit my girlfriend in Berlin during Christmas? And so I told her, I said, you've got to find somebody for me to audition. So Friedrich Posch was one of the most important managers in opera in all of Germany back in the early 60s. And so she must have gave a good sales pitch, but didn't say I was her boyfriend. And so I didn't have any money, so I went to the NAACP in New York City, and Roy Wilkins was the head of it then, but I went there, and I was so naive, I just went to this big tall building in New York City, and I go to this office, and I walk in, the receptionist said, may I help you? I said, oh yes, just like that, really. I said, I'm looking to see if maybe you folks are giving some money to go to Germany. She looked at me like I was some kind of a nut. I said, I've got a chance to go over there and sing. She said, well, we don't have anything like that within the NAACP. And I said, well, I would really like to just maybe talk to somebody, because she was the receptionist. So she said, well, just a moment. So she arranged for me to speak to somebody else. So I spoke to that person, and they said the same thing that the receptionist said, we don't have funds to give to people to fly off to Germany and audition. I said, well, I'm a student at Juilliard School of Music. You're what? I said, oh, I'm a student at Juilliard School of Music. Oh, really? And her whole countenance changed. And so I told her I had a chance to go over and audition for an agent. And I thank God for everything. And so they said, well, we don't have any money for something like that, but they took up a collection in the office. And then they told me to go to the New York Community Trust Fund and tell them that they sent me there, and also Mr. Kellis, who was my teacher at the University of Iowa, and they gave me enough money to fly over to Berlin to audition. So I flew over on the 24th of December 1964 with Pan American Airlines to Düsseldorf, arrived on Christmas morning. 3 days later, I auditioned for this agent, and he said, you know, could you wait till after the first of the year? He said, I like your voice. I'd like to send you to Berlin and audition for the Deutsche Oper. The Deutsche Oper is like our Metropolitan Opera House, German opera house in Berlin. And so, and I had to just quickly tell him when I flew out to audition for Juilliard, Mr. Kellis, when I was still at the University of Iowa, he said, Simon, you need to go to an all-musical school, because I really didn't study music at the University of Iowa. And so I went out to Juilliard, and again, naivety can be a plus. It really can be. I didn't have enough sense to be nervous to audition for Juilliard School of Music. I barely knew what it was, but anyhow, I went out to Juilliard, and it was in the old original building, and I auditioned. And after I finished singing my 3 or 4 songs, they said, would you just wait outside the door there? So, and you know, they don't normally do this, so I go outside the door and just walking up down the halls, and they called me back in. And when I auditioned, this is really true, I was more excited about seeing the skyscrapers in the skyscraper than I was about auditioning for Juilliard. And so I didn't have enough sense to be nervous, or I hadn't learned fear. And so I did my pieces, came back in, and they called me back in, and this is how naive I was. They said, well, whatever they said, and they said, we'd like to give you a scholarship to come to Juilliard. I said, oh, okay. And they looked at me like really I was some kind of a nut, because I should have been jumping up and down, but I didn't realize what Juilliard was. And Mr. Fellis had told him I don't have any money. And they said, and he said, but you'll work, and I did work at Juilliard, I worked in the kitchen and everything, but they said, we'll also get you a grant from the Rockefeller family. And I said, oh, okay. I thought it was some family dealing in rocks, really. And I found out it was Steve Rockefeller, the Martha Baird, one of the daughters. Martha Baird gave me a scholarship. And so all of that goes, when I went to Berlin, so I auditioned, and after I finished auditioning at the opera in Berlin, they said, we want you to sing the opera of the King in Verdi's Aida, April 19th, 1965. So I flew back to Juilliard, went to Dean Waldrop, Gideon Waldrop, who was a dean at Juilliard, and I figured, you know, he'd really be excited. I'm still a student, and they've asked me to come sing the King in Aida. And I went to Dean Waldrop. He said, well, Simon, you'll have to tell them no. He said, you will not have a career if you don't finish Juilliard School of Music. But my heart just sank. I tell Anne I wish you'd been around because I needed to talk to you. You weren't there. But anyhow, so I went to Christopher West, who was head of the Opera Theater within Juilliard, and told him this wonderful experience that I had in Berlin, and they wanted me to come over. And he was British. He said, well, Simon, you'll have to tell them no, because if you don't finish Juilliard School of Music, you shall never have a career. My heart sank again. And I really didn't know what to do, but something said, and I think it was God, who said, go east, young man, go east. So I went to Berlin, arrived. Mr. Kellis taught me the role of the King, and it was in German and not in Italian that Verdi originally wrote it in. I'm telling you this because I know for sure there is a God. I'll tell you more about it later to my best friend. So I had learned the role from memory, arrived about 6 or 7 days before I was going to be singing. I arrived and they told me I had to sing Ramphis, who's the high priest, and that's the biggest bass role. And here I am. I'd never sung with an orchestra. I'd never been on a stage. And they told me I had to sing Ramphis. So I called up Mr. Kellis, my voice teacher, right here in Iowa, and asked Mr. Kellis. He said, well, Simone, he always called me Simone. He said, but they told you you had to do the King. I said, I know, Mr. Kellis. He said, Simone, I know you can. He said, you study. So I studied 4 days.
What do you mean study? Did you listen? Did you play?
No.
You just
Hilsdorf was a coach in German. Choreography, a coach. He taught me the role of Ramphis in 4 days. Now, this is the honest truth, and God hears me. I've told this story before. I did not meet any of my colleagues until during the performance. I never met the conductor, who was Giuseppe Patane, an Italian conductor, and I memorized it in 4 days, and really, I didn't even meet Aida or Amedes, nor the Radames, nor the King. And I memorized all of that opera in German in 4 days. And the reason I'm telling you this because God gave me a talent to memorize. And can you imagine a little skinny colored kid from Centerville singing on the stage at the Opera House in Berlin, had never sung with an orchestra before, had never sung in German, and had never met the conductor until after the performance. He came to my dressing room, and he said, just popped in, he was a very famous Italian conductor, he sings an aria, but he said, nobody told me you were a beginner, that you'd never sung opera before. He said, I would have worked with you. He said, but you did okay, you didn't make any mistakes. Now, that was a miracle. And I'll just switch over to one more. In 1966, the State Department contacted me. To this day, I don't know how or why, or that they'd heard of me, and wanted me to represent the United States in that Tchaikovsky vocal competition in 1966. It was the first year it was open to singers. It was just pianists, Van Cliburn, and violinists, but that was the first year they had it for singers. And so, obviously I said yes, or okay again. But you had to sing a certain number of songs in Russian. And they said, we will send you, because I was then singing in Berlin and in Lubeck, Germany, at the opera houses. And this all happened within like 1 year. So I got the book of Tchaikovsky songs in Russian, Cyrillic, and they never sent me the money. Typical government, they never sent me the money. I had the music, and it was not in English or it was in Russian Cyrillic. And so something said, go ahead and go east again, farther east. So I go from East Berlin on Aeroflot, the worst airline in the world. I flew from there to Moscow. That's what I'm going to tell all of you. There is a God. I was on the plane, and sitting next to me was a Russian actress who spoke German, and I spoke a little German then. And she asked me why I was going to Moscow. And I said, well, I'm going to be singing in the Tchaikovsky competition. Oh, she was just so excited. So I pulled out my music, the Tchaikovsky songs, and I said, could you maybe teach me one song in the Russian phonetically? And she said, well, yes. It took a 3-hour flight from East Berlin to Moscow. She taught me a whole song in Cyrillic, in Russian. See, honest to God, true. Ni slova udrukvoy. If any of you speak Russian, not a word, oh my friend. So I arrived in Moscow, but I hadn't heard the melody. And I just learned the words phonetically. And my accompanist, her name was Irina Zorina, the Russian lady. And she said, she spoke a little English, of course. What sing you round one Russian? I said, well, ni slovo something. And she said, Russian not bad, we make it better, we make it better. I had never heard the melody. She played the piano, and I saw the notes, and I sang that song. I'd never sung it before in my life. And the first round of the competition, you had to sing one song in the Russian, everybody did, and then you had to sing 3 other pieces. I did King Philip's aria, Verdi's opera, Don Carlos, and other things. And so I was promoted to the second round, or 3 rounds. And she was all excited, this Russian lady playing for this Chorny, you know, Russian means black, this Chorny man. And she said, what's in you, round 2? And I said, well, I don't know anything else in Russian. You should have seen her face. It just dropped. And she probably figured if she didn't play well and this black guy didn't advance and send her to Siberia or something. I don't know. But anyhow, she said, no, we work hard. I learned Grayman's aria in the opera Eugene Onegin. In Russian, lasts about 6 minutes, and 2 other songs in Russian, and I memorized them all. But in Grayman's aria is an aria song from the opera Eugene Onegin, lasts, as I said, about 6 minutes. I finished it in 2 minutes. I had a complete blank for some. The B section was like A, B, A, and the B section is a long section, and the A and the B are exactly the same. And so my poor pianist was turning pages trying to find out. But the worst part of it all, Russian people know Grayman's aria like you people all know Old Man River. That's one of their national songs. And the audience went, oh. Well, 2,000 people in Tchaikovsky Hall, when they went, oh. It sounded like a hurricane. So I finished those songs, and I went through, because, and the third round I knew my name would not be on the list saying you've been promoted to the third and final round. I went out, and there it was. And the reason I tell you this, even to this day, I don't know how I did that. And that's why God was working through me, because I didn't know any of those songs. I never took sight reading in my life. When I sang with you in the chamber singers at the University of Iowa, you didn't know this, but I could read music, but I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know any of this. And can you imagine learning Russian, or even learning Brahms, and never having sung with an orchestra, a conductor, or anything? And I know it was because I had never learned fear that I was just able to do it. But then I found out that God gave me a talent, another talent for languages. I was singing and recording in German, Italian, French, Spanish, Russian, Catalan, all of those languages. When I was in Centerville, I didn't know anything except English. And so people ask me all the time, how did you do that? Like you just asked me, and I went under this long monologue. God. I really believe that God gave this talent to me, not only to sing, but for languages, memorization, etc. And that's why to this very day, I'm deeply, deeply spiritual, because God gave all of that to me.
Doesn't it make you think what a gift a teacher has to have to recognize in a young person coming up the line that this is something special? And sometimes it's just a twinkle in an eye, but sometimes it's a miracle like this. And then what do you do? And if the teacher knows enough to get out of the way, but sometimes the student needs encouragement and a little bit of help. And I think it goes both ways. It's God, it's the teacher, it's the student, and the luck of the draw. And plus, I think there's also a bit of a risk taker in Simon Estes. Right? He says he was not afraid, but you have to have guts to do what he did at such a young age, and somehow you mustered that. Look, we could talk about this kind of stuff forever, but I'm going to ask one more thing, and then we're going to let you talk.
I want to say one more thing. Charles Kellis, this is another reason I believe in God. Charles Kellis, and she knew him. I wanted to sing in the university choir at the University of Iowa, and she knows who, I won't mention his name because he's no longer living, but I said, could I sing in the choir? And he said, no, your voice isn't good enough. And I said, well, you're the head of the voice department. I said, could I take voice lessons with you? He said, no, I wouldn't waste my time with you.
Can you imagine?
This is true.
I know who that is, too.
Yeah, she does. And he said, no, you have no talent. I wouldn't waste my time with you. However, there's a young singer coming here this fall, and this was 1961. And he said, maybe he'll take you. I said, well, I just want to sing. That was Charles Kellis. And Charles Kellis was sent to Iowa City, Iowa in 1961 to discover Simon Estes. Because he heard me singing, and he said to me, you have a voice to sing opera. And I said, what's opera? And he played some recordings of me, of an Italian-based baritone named Cesare Siepi, one of the greatest Italian basses. And he played Leontine Price, so I could hear her. He wanted me to hear opera music. And then he played Rimsky-Korsakov's Scheherazade, because he wanted me to hear orchestral music. I never heard orchestral music. And so I listened to that, and after I finished listening to it, I said to Mr. Kellis, I really like that stuff. I just call it stuff. But I say that because I really believe Charles Kellis was sent to Iowa City to discover me, or I would be sitting here today. And he was my voice teacher.
See, there's somebody like that, and if you talk to a lot of real stars, there's somebody like that someplace along the way. They almost always don't do it exclusively by themselves.
Right.
There is in Simon Estes' career a huge element of philanthropy, which I want to be sure that we talk about a little bit, because Ray Muston, who we all know, and others of you who are members of Rotary had a big project with the School of Music that Simon has named after himself in South Africa. He'll tell you about that. But one year, 40 student singers from that high school came to Iowa on Rotary money. They had to have travel, and they stayed in homes for an entire year, completely immersed in English and everything else. Imagine. And most of them were, how would I say, disadvantaged in Africa.
The township, those horrible township areas, that's where they were from. Where they lived, there were over 400,000 in Khayelitsha, that was a suburb of Cape Town. They had no running water, no electricity. 400, they lived in, not in shacks, they were less than shacks. And I went out and saw it, it's a long, long story, and that's when I founded the choir, and I brought them all over to Iowa. And they went to 15 different high schools in the Des Moines, Iowa area. There was one man in South Africa, he was a white businessman, very wealthy. He got to know me because I sang. I was the first black person to sing there after apartheid. And he said, I will pay for all of those students' tickets to fly to Iowa, Des Moines, Iowa, and back, but you don't ever tell my name to anybody. I promise, and I wouldn't.
$200,000 or something, you know, it's, and to some people like that, it's a drop in the bucket. 2011, I think that was. I have it in an article that Ray's not feeling well. I want to come and give you all code.
98.
Oh, 98. Oh, I'm way wrong.
That sounds right, because I founded the school in 1994.
Okay, so I wrote it down wrong. Okay. Thank you very much. Simon also has, I don't know how many, but several foundations, all of which are philanthropic. And the most recent one, you can talk about this, or you may ask him certainly about it. But right this minute, he's hard at work on nets for helping solve the problem of malaria. And when you think of a man like this, who has all the gifts that he has and all the experience that he has, still caring deeply for the less advantaged of all of us, I mean, it is really a remarkable story. And so philanthropy is a big part of what makes Simon the person that he is. And I think it's an interesting way for us to go if we want to talk about it a little bit. Raised hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, not hundreds of millions, but millions.
Can I remember hearing you say?
But I sang in the grand finale concert of the World Soccer, what's going on right now, as you know, in Qatar. And the president of South Africa was there, and I took my choir from Cape Town, Khayelitsha, the suburb, up to sing in that grand finale concert. That was 2010. And before I went out to sing, the moderator mentioned that every 30 seconds, a child 5 years of age and under was dying from malaria from a mosquito bite, and all they needed was a $5 treated net under which to sleep. And I was just shocked, because we eradicated malaria in the United States in 1951, 1952. So I didn't know that it even still existed in the world of birds. But anyhow, and 90% of all the malaria deaths were in sub-Saharan Africa. And so God laid it on my heart to do something about it. So I flew with my wife, and I flew out to Washington, D.C. to the United Nations Foundation to make sure all of this information was true. 1 million little black children were dying every year in Africa from malaria. This is all statistics. You can find it all at the United Nations Foundation. And I couldn't believe it. So anyhow, God called me to do something about it. And so I said, well, and this was now 2013. And I said, well, how many children have died the last 20 years in Africa? She said 20 million little children, 5 years of age. And all they needed was a treated net. Because when the mosquito touches the net, it dies immediately. You can't transmit it to someone else. So God called me to do that, and so I spoke to a very important man in Iowa that I know many of you probably know him. I won't mention his name. And I said, I want to raise money to help save some children's lives in Africa. And so he made an arrangement for me to meet many fortunate, blessed people in Iowa, whether they consider them blessed or not, but very wealthy. And I raised $432,000. I did a benefit concert at the Hilton Coliseum with a whole bunch of 1,000 high school students from 52 different high schools. And that one concert, we raised $100,000. So I raised $532,000, and I sent every penny of it to the United Nations to help to buy these nets, because each net costs $5. Incidentally, the solution for the nets is made in Iowa too. But all of these things just happened. I think God just called me to do these things, and I think we're put on this earth to serve the Lord, to love the Lord, and to serve and love one another. And that's, I just want to say one thing. My whole life, I really credit everything to the Lord, because my grandfather, I have a picture of him, was a slave sold for $500, and my grandmother breastfed a wet nurse who was the wife of Dr. Brummett, who was in Centerville, Iowa. My grandmother breastfed. She was a wet nurse for Dr. Brummett. Dr. Brummett was a man who delivered me from my mother's womb in 1938 in a little white house in Centerville that was 27 feet by 25 feet. We didn't have any electricity, no running water, no indoor facilities. I had 3 older sisters. We lived in that little house, but we had a lot of faith and we had a lot of love, but we were really poor.
He has interesting things that he's taken through his life because of his mother, who said 2 or 3 interesting things which he's talked to me about through our lives together. I wonder if you can remember a couple of them.
Well, my mother had a voice. Had she not been a colored lady, having been born in 1910, she would have been at the Metropolitan Opera. My mother had a voice. She could sing first soprano, mezzo soprano, and alto. When my mother, before she died in Des Moines in 2004, she was almost 95, she could still sing a low D above low C that I sang as a bass. But she gave me great wisdom, something that I will never forget. Certain things. First of all, she taught my father, and my father couldn't read or write. He was born in 1891. He was in the First World War, but he came to Centerville because of the coal mines, and you know all about the coal mines. But she gave me some words of wisdom about character. And she said, son, you must never hate white people. No matter how they treat you, you must not hate them, you must pray for them. And she said, remember this, son, she said, truth is very important. She said, remember this, if a person ever lies, they have to tell 13 lies to try to get out of the first lie. I don't know where she came up with that, but she said that to me. And she said, never put all of your faith and hope and trust in another human being, because they might betray you or disappoint you, but Jesus never will. So make sure you do that. And she taught my sisters, because my father couldn't read or write, but she taught me all of those things, and she always said, put the Lord first and never have hate in your heart. For example, say, I'm just giving an example. If I would come home from Centerville, because she knows Centerville, if a white boy said it called me the N-word or hit me, I would have told my mother that. You know, she would say, well, now you get down on your knees and you pray for that boy. Well, now you say, now wait a minute, mother. He called me the N-word, or he hit me. Get down on your knees and you pray. And that followed me all through my career, because when I first started singing opera, especially in the United States, they wouldn't let me sing in a lot of the opera houses here. I was underpaid tremendously. But I had to swallow my ego or my pride, or I wouldn't be here today. But she just, and I remember in the early 70s, I was living in New York, and I called my mother, and I was in tears. I said, you know, Mother, I've sung in Vienna, in London, in Paris, in Rome, Zurich, etc., etc., and they still won't let me sing in some of the opera houses in my own country. My mother said, well, now, son, you just get down on your knees and do it. And now I've sung in every opera house in the United States. I've sung in 84 different opera houses all around the world. Nobody else has done that. I'm not bragging, I'm just informing you. Nobody's done that. I've sung with 115 orchestras all around the world. No other singer, white, black, Asian, no one has done that. People don't know because I don't brag about it. But that's really true. I've sung with 9 of the world's greatest conductors. With Leonard Bernstein, Eric Leinsdorf, Schulte, Zubin Mehta, Mazel, Moose, all these people. And I was from our little town in Centerville.
Would you like to ask him anything? We have about 15 minutes. Goes fast, doesn't it? And maybe you'd like to ask something? Or do we still have one piece left to play? Yeah, we've got a piece of Wagner for you. When he called me on the phone, I have to hold the phone out like this because it's so darn loud. But it's a remarkable instrument. Wouldn't you like to be able to see what that looks like, how thick those chords are, and how strong those muscles are? That's an amazing instrument. Somebody want to ask something? Yes, Judy.
I want to know if you consider Don Gunderson as your discoverer, as the person who found you.
She's asking if Don Gunderson, who was the high school choral director in Centerville when Simon was coming along, if he was the person that really started him on his track.
And the answer is yes. Don Gunderson was a man who asked the high school, it was Howard, it was called Howard Junior High School?
Howard.
Howard.
H-O-W-A-R.
Okay,
Yeah.
yes. And asked if I could come over and sing the high school choir, and he said yes. But I still didn't know I had any special voice. I really didn't know.
Well, had he heard you somewhere?
That's to this day, I don't know. It's like, I don't know. All I know is he came over and asked, and I don't know where he heard me sing, but he heard me sing someplace.
In one of the bios that I have read about Simon, there's a pianist, a teacher who accompanied you when you were in junior high school, went around with you, and maybe it was she that called.
Well, Barbara Bradley.
That's it.
Barbara Bradley played the piano for me, and so did Bob Warren. Not Bob Warren, but Bob Baldwin from Centerville. He played the piano for me too, so go ahead.
No, that's all I was going to say about that. I think there's some connections. And again, it's admonition to all of us to support our local teachers who have so much to say about the development of our youth, and especially our talented youth, because without somebody guiding them. Should I tell this one quick little story? I was at Luther when Weston Noble retired. They hadn't made provision for his successor. So they're frantically calling around, and they called and asked me if I could come there to take his place until they found the person that would be the permanent replacement. I couldn't go for the whole year, but I went in the fall. I was astounded at the quality of those voices. Wonderful singers, and one little tenor. You'll know him because he's in this town. But he came in the room to audition for final placement in Nordic choir, and he had a little piece of Verdi, and he was 20 years old, and I wanted to just take his teacher apart. I said, what in the world are you doing, assigning a piece like this to this young man? Well, then I bit my tongue. No, but I bit my tongue, and I thought, let's give him a chance. Peel the paint off the ceiling with his high B flat, just an enormous gift. And those kids are around. I said, what are you going to do with yourself? Well, I'll probably teach junior high in Racine, Wisconsin. He said, you can't teach junior high in Racine, Wisconsin until you're 40. You know, you got to sing while you can, while your voice is still. Well, you know, it's not easy because the kids around here just don't have a vision of the wider world. So, yes, ma'am.
I think we ought to point out that the auditorium at Centerville High School is named the
Simon Estes. He has buildings named after him. One is in Centerville.
They had a big celebration, and we all went down there and claimed that we'd done it. You know?
I think we've just about heard enough about Centerville, don't you think? Yes, ma'am.
You've spoken about that first experience in Germany.
Yes.
And I'm wondering about the other aspect acting.
Mhm.
And was there a moment or a performance or a role where you really felt you were learning about not just the singing, but the whole acting that goes into the many roles you got?
Did you hear her all right? Okay.
It started so quickly, my whole career. I think it was pre-designed, divine or something, because I didn't realize until probably in the mid-'80s that I was this opera singer, because I had to learn so quickly so much repertoire, because most of my career started in Europe, of course. All of those opera houses, I sang for the Pope, I've sung for 2 popes. I'm not Catholic, but I sang for 2 popes at the Vatican. Nelson Mandela wrote Nobel Prize Committee. I've sung for all of these things. I never had time to really realize what had happened to me. And to this day, that's why I really am a Christian, and I know it's all because of God. I sang with Joseph Junta, the Yankee Doodle Pops concert. You all know about that, I'm sure, every 4th of July they have. And the year before the pandemic hit us all, I sang with Joseph Junta and the Des Moines Symphony Orchestra, and his wife, Carrie, is an opera singer, but she didn't have a big career. And there were 100,000 people out there on the grounds of the Capitol for these Yankee Doodle Pops concerts they have. And the next morning, Joseph Junta, you all know who he is, he's a conductor of the Des Moines Symphony Orchestra. Joseph called me. He said, "Simon, I have to tell you something." And no one had ever said this before in my life. He said, Carrie was sitting there in a performance, and he said, tears were running down her face. And she said to herself, Simon Estes is a living miracle. And Joseph wanted to tell me that. I said, how can he still sing like that at 80 years of age? And I said, no one has ever said that. I said, well, it's God. Because God's the only one who can make miracles. And I just taught at Juilliard 3 weeks ago. I was in New York City. I taught at Manhattan School of Music, Juilliard. And I told all those students there, I said, you want to know something? All of you wanted to be classical singers. Do you know that God put a miracle in your throat? He put a miracle in your throat. And they were just mesmerized what I was saying. I said, you know, those little vocal folds are about that long. A piano has 88 keys and 88 different pitches. A violin has 4 strings and a bow and fingers. Other instruments need the trumpet, they need air, etc., etc. But we can make all of these different pitches on those little folds in our throat. That is a miracle. Each one of you has that miracle because you're able to speak. And you've had nothing to do with it the way God designed it. That air has to pass through, and those little vocal folds have to vibrate, and they produce that speaking sound as well as a vocal sound. But opera singers are very, very blessed, and that's why I tell them all they should thank God. We put Frank Sinatra, Nat King Cole, Bing Crosby, Perry Como, I loved all of those guys, music and singing. You put them on the stage at the Metropolitan Opera House, and without that microphone and this microphone and an orchestra, and they had beautiful voices, you know that, all of them. But you wouldn't hear a sound. God gave us these special vocal folds that we can produce that sound.
Plus there's resonation.
That's a proper sound.
There's resonation, needless to say, the size of my head.
No, but see, God gave these special vocal folds to produce that sound without this microphone.
What'd you do for fun?
I never had time for fun because I was always learning new music.
So that girl went by the wayside fast.
Oh, that's an interesting story. No, I gotta think. You know, I met this girlfriend in Juilliard. I'll make it real fast. So anyhow, she was my girlfriend, and I won the 3rd prize in the incident. I never won the 1st prize, In the Tchaikovsky competition, Russia got third prize. Munich International Competition, they have also got third prize. But anyhow, I won the third prize in 1965, and my girlfriend entered the competition in 1968 in Munich, Germany. And so I went there with her, and a black guy was there that I'd never met before. His name was Julius Tillman. He was a musician and went to Howard University. And he came up to me because he knew I was an opera singer. He said, Simon, he said, hello, and he introduced himself to me. And I said, well, why are you here? He said, I'm playing for someone. I said, well, you know, my girlfriend has a really beautiful voice. I think she's going to win the competition. And he said, and keep in mind, I'd never met him. He said, no, she isn't. I said, this arrogant God, who's he? He said, Jessie Norman is going to win the competition. And she was still at Howard University. And I said, well, you haven't heard my girlfriend saying. I said, well, she got that. He said, I'm telling you, she's not going to win the competition. Jessie Norman. I said, you just wait and hear her sing. Well, now, a lot of you know who Jessie Norman is. You know, she passed away, but she came out from that side of the stage at the Bayerische Rundfunk in Munich, Germany. Julius was playing the piano. She did So Me Day. She sang 3 bars, and I said, my girlfriend doesn't have a prayer. She doesn't have a prayer.
You know, I have a little funny story about Jessie Norman. We did the Olympics in Atlanta in some year, I don't know, not very long ago. And Jessie Norman was one of the featured solo singers. And I was conducting the chorus and getting them ready and all that, and Jessie Norman was coming to a rehearsal. At that point, she had in her contract that she couldn't have any steps to walk up, and she kind of shuffled. So I heard her coming from the stage with this shuffling, kind of bedroom slippery noise. All of a sudden, oh, there she was. Now, I'm not so tall, but this was an enormous person.
She's about as tall as I.
And she had a chartreuse turban-like deal, silk, wound around and wound around and wound around. And of course, she's from Georgia. The Olympics were in Georgia. The chorus is from Atlanta. So I said to the chorus before she got out there, this is a person, it's like Simon's in Iowa. We're extremely proud that we have allowed this person to come up through our ranks. Here's Jessie Norman. So I said, I think it'd be great if you'd stand up and applaud when she comes on the stage. So they just roared, of course, and then she started to sing, and I thought I was going to get swallowed up in an alligator's mouth. She has a huge mouth.
Yes.
And the sound, oh my goodness.
When I heard her sing in Munich, I said, this is the voice of the century, but she was a contralto.
Yeah, she was.
She was a contralto, and then
Isn't going to make it.
they forced her to become a soprano, but anyway, when she made her debut at the Met, I let her stay at my apartment because I was in New York at that time. So once she made her debut at the Metropolitan Opera, I let her stay in my apartment.
Can you tell the story about what Leontine Price told you when you first were hired at the Met?
Well, I'll just tell you. I've always admired Leontine Price, and we've sung together. You can go online and see us singing her farewell Aida. But she said, Simon, I was at her house in New York. She said, it's going to be more difficult for you as a black man to sing opera. And I'm quoting her and not myself. She said, you're independent. She said, you're handsome. Well, I didn't say that either. Just to say. And she said, you're educated, and you've got principles, and you've got character. And she said, it's going to be very difficult. I said, no, Leontine, you were the one who really opened the doors for all of us. And she gave me courage because a lot of people don't know when she opened the Met with Anthony and Cleopatra, with Justino Diaz and Cleopatra. None of you folks know what I'm going to tell you. She got letters from white people, and they used the N-word in it. Said, if you open that, we are going to kill you. She had to go through that. When I had performed in the South years ago, I cannot tell you what I went through. They accused me of stealing a white woman's jewelry because I was the only colored person in the hotel. And they stopped me and said, what did you do with it? I said, what are you talking about? We know you stole the woman's jewelry. I sang in some restaurants in the South. Guys came in, He said, look at that black nigger sitting here. Get out of here. And I had a white accompanist named Harold Brown. He was even taller than I was. And he started to talk back. I said, Harold, keep your mouth shut. I said, we got to walk out of this place. And those three guys, you know, I said, we just be quiet. You don't know what I would do. But I don't feel sorry for myself. And I don't hate any white people. Anything that goes wrong, my mother said, get that on it. I read the Bible through with my mother when I was 11 years of age in Centerville, Iowa. And when my wife and I got married, we decided to start our marriage out reading the Bible through. And if you haven't all done it, and you all can still see a little bit, read 3 chapters a day, and 5 on Sunday. Who said 5 on Sunday? God bless you, sister. You finish the Bible in a year. I've read many books. I've been in many museums, etc. Fabulous places all around the world. There's no book like it, I tell you. It's fantastic. And basically, it should be easy for all of us to live, folks. All God asks us to do in those 10, later on 11 commandments was to love God, and he said love your neighbors yourself. All we have to do is love, and we could have peace, and we could have a beautiful world in which to live. But just think of all the advances we made in science and technology and aerospace, etc., etc., but we haven't learned how to love one another. So let's all start loving each other in this room. Even though we are advanced citizens, we can still learn to love each other and try to teach other people how to love, because there's only one race, the human race. It all started over in Northeast Africa, and we're different because God made us different. Colors, eye shapes, texture of hair, to test the quality of our character. Can we love someone if they look different from the way we do? That's why he made us different. But underneath this epidermis here, we are all the same. So let's try a little love.
Well, one thing is we don't all have that voice, do we? Thank you all for coming. Thank you for being patient with us. Thanks to Simon for giving us of himself tonight. Drove all the way over here by himself, lives in Ankeny now, and I think is set to do all kinds of wonderful things for all of us. You have some music to play, Lindsay? All right, on the way out. Go Hawks, and let's hope that Georgia